Hold her up! Stop! Waiting tables. Why, hello there, friends. I'm Alex Curtis, and this is Stop Waiting Tables, the podcast where I interview artists of all kinds about making art and making a living. In these conversations, I'm looking to uncover the tools and tactics that my guests are using to create their own success rather than waiting around for success to come to them. And this is success in all different areas. This is success in their personal lives. How do they take care of themselves and maintain meaningful relationships so that they can succeed just as happy people out in the world? This is financial success. How do they make money, creatively or otherwise, so that they aren't living paycheck to paycheck doing something that they hate just to make ends meet? And it's artistic success. How are they either finding opportunities to do the thing they love or creating their own opportunities to do the thing they love so that they're not just waiting around for the phone to ring and for opportunities to come their way? So really, this entire conversation is all about personal empowerment. How do we put ourselves in the driver's seat of our own lives and in our creative careers so that our entire existence doesn't hinge on the unlikely event of being discovered, which, hey, maybe you will be, but how do we set ourselves up so that even if you're not, you're happy and fulfilled anyway? So that's what we're doing here. Today's guest is the extraordinary writer and just wonderful human being, Amanda Harris. Amanda Harris is a writer who has her MFA in creative writing from the New School, and her award-winning short stories have been published in literary journals including the Normal School and the Missouri Review. She's won the Normal Prize for Fiction, was a finalist for the Missouri Review's Editors Prize contest in fiction, and won the 2018 Distinguished Teaching Award at John Jay College, where she's an adjunct faculty member teaching composition and creative writing. And now she's working on her very first novel. In this interview, we talk about her process as a writer, how writing can help heal trauma, the approach that makes her so inspiring as a teacher and mentor. In fact, if you check her out on ratemyprofessor.com, she has a 5 out of 5 rating, which is incredible. And everyone on that site says that they would happily take her class again. And we also talk about the most common traps that she sees both student and professional writers falling into, and so much more. At the beginning of this interview, I mentioned another podcast she was on, which is an interview that she did with John Jay College after winning the Distinguished Teaching Award. So if after this episode is over, you're hungry to hear more, I recommend going and checking that out. Just type Amanda Harris Distinguished Teaching Award into the Google machine, and it will pop right up. I'm so happy that Amanda and I had this chance to sit down together and have this conversation. I hope that you enjoy it. And without further ado, Amanda Harris. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for coming.
So the last time we talked, probably in general, was at least a year ago.
At least.
Yeah. So in the past year, what's happened?
Well, this year I won a big teaching award.
I know. I listened to your podcast. Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Now, what was the award and how did you win it?
So it's the Distinguished Teaching Award at John Jay, and it made me happy because the students have to nominate you. So it's not a popularity contest among the tenured professors, and so I know that I had one student in particular that wrote like a book about me.
Okay.
And it was a long letter, and I've had her for 3 classes, and she just graduated. And so then they told me that I had been nominated, and I had to submit all these materials. So I submitted all these materials. It took me like 40 hours to assemble them and write them. And I think I'm the second adjunct to win. It's normally people that have been teaching for decades.
Right.
So it meant a lot because we're not paid that much, and my own art suffers because I have to grade for 4 hours every weekend or whatever. But,
right.
It was a pat on the head from the outside world. The universe telling me I'm making a difference, and it's making a difference in my career too.
Really? Teaching is or the awards making a difference?
Well, both, because the award can actually get me better jobs in the future, whether I'm at John Jay or another school.
Yeah.
Because it's pretty competitive, and I'm a people pleaser, so it means that I pleased a lot of people. So that makes me happy.
And did it come with anything? Do you get a pay bump? Did it have like any financial side? Or was it really just like a lovely pat on the back with like...
I got a check.
Okay,
I got a check too. It wasn't humongous, but yeah, I got a nice size check, and
are we allowed to know how much it is? Or?
Yeah, it was $1,000.
Okay.
And there was a big ceremony, and I got that crystal.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful.
And so it meant a lot because I love my job, and the students always make me feel appreciated, but I don't always feel super appreciated being a part-time worker.
Right.
Because, and when you average in all the hours, it's kind of minimum wage because we're not paid for grading or prep time or anything. So as an English teacher, grading essays is time-consuming.
Right. And I had something and it's just left me. Oh, right. And you haven't even been teaching that long. Is that correct?
4 years.
Okay.
So
I mean, that's not like...
It's not like...
Tens of years.
No. And I've done things since the beginning where it wouldn't have surprised me if I was at a different sort of school, if there was some sort of disciplinary action that came in. Because I don't totally do everything by the book, and we do some experimental stuff in class that's really interactive and can be triggering, and it's really raw, and it gets emotional.
So in that other podcast about your teaching award, I heard about the privilege walk. What are some of the other exercises or things you do that sort of fall under that category of like could be?
Well, because privilege is a big theme for my comp courses, so...
What's your comp course called?
It's just composition 1 or 2, but we can choose the theme.
Okay.
So everyone has to take no matter what your major is, you have to take comp 1 and 2. So privilege is my main theme for comp 1, focusing on race, class, gender. And then for comp 2, I base it around Truman Capote's book In Cold Blood.
Right.
And we watch movies and study primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. And they love it because it's a criminal justice school, and it's the first true crime novel.
Right.
But like I was just observed last week, and I also do and this wasn't my conception either, but waste basket toss where everyone crumples up a piece of paper and they have to stay in their seat, and there's 27 students, and they have to try to shoot the paper into the recycling bin in front of the room. And so, and that ties into our discussion of privilege, because of course people in the front are more privileged, they're closer. The people who come in late are in the back, they're complaining it's not fair. So they're used to the term privilege and applying it to their lives. And so it wasn't a big jump to go from that to, an Indian student or a Bangladeshi student talking about caste systems and preferential treatment among men and their families. And there's a lot of family dynamics and issues going on in my students' lives because they're often first-generation American in generational clashes and stuff. And the women are very outspoken and make about 60% of my students. So the professor who observed me was happy that the women were so vocal and dominating the class discussions, because that's not always the case.
Right.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, particularly from the reviews, from the students' feedback, which of course is positive because you were nominated for your beautiful award, that you are really good at tricking people into learning and inspiring them with a sense of purpose, that their work matters and that their voice matters.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Well, you have to love what you do. You know that.
Right.
As a facilitator, as a teacher. And I'm super hyper, and I have a lot of anxiety that I exercise by teaching and talking about my work, and it's and so I have this emotional flashing sort of way about me, like, because I want to model. If I'm asking them to be vulnerable in a creative writing class, I have to be vulnerable in the way that I teach them.
Yeah.
So and I like to dispel a lot of rumors about writing and art, and and the students, many of them have been told they're not good writers, and they're in their early 20s. There's no such thing as a not good writer, especially when you're that young. And so I want them to feel safe that they're all doing great for whatever level they're at, and yet I expect improvement. And that I'm very opinionated about this stuff. I don't believe in writer's block. I think that that's an excuse. I think that, like boredom, I don't believe in boredom. I feel like they're umbrella terms for something more serious, like, and something that could be emotional or psychological. Like if you're bored, we're human beings. We're always thinking. We're not bored. We're afraid of something. We're not ready to face something. We want to run away from something, but we're not bored. So it's like with writer's block, it's like, unless your hands are physically broken, you can still hold a pen and write. You can still type. You could type, I don't know what I'm writing. You can write, I'm afraid of being judged by my peers. So just being kind of like, and this is stuff that I face every day. I understand the perfectionism. I understand the procrastination. And just so that they know that it's put your butt in the chair. It's not you wait until you're inspired, because then you won't create anything. You have to be sitting there to become inspired. It's not going to happen when you're doing something else most of the time.
Are these creative writing courses?
I teach. I usually teach one comp and one creative writing, but like last semester and also next semester, I'm teaching 2 creative writing. Okay. And they're intro. So most of these students have never been in a workshop setting before.
And so the conversations about privilege are happening then within the same class that then we're creative writing.
There are 2 different classes.
Those are 2 different classes.
Yeah. But
so can you just give me what's the quick syllabus of each of those classes, or what's the little summary of what's that called?
Well, so like composition is basically they're creating, we don't necessarily like the term research paper because it has all those high school connotations, like the 5-paragraph essay and stuff. So what we call it is an inquiry-based paper where, and I spend a lot of time, I give them a lot of time, maybe more than I should, but focusing on a very specific demographic and topic that they care about. And the theme with privilege is that I want there to be some sort of connection between the personal and the public, and the private and the political. And I want them to care about it. And I just tell them over and over and over, if you're bored and you're writing this paper, I'm going to be bored when I'm reading it, and it's not going to get a good grade because you don't care about it. So I give them I have them rewrite the proposal 2 or 3 times. And that, that could be done in a week, but it takes 3 weeks, sometimes longer. And so now I have 27 students who love their topics. So they're motivated to research it and get counter arguments and everything.
Right.
And then the creative writing course is intro. So if they want to take any creative writing courses in the future, they have to go through intro. And so that's teaching them creative nonfiction, a short story, and then poetry. And we workshop each one, so there's no text. So at each class, we're workshopping 2 student stories. So there's a date that they sign up for when the story is due. They have to bring in hard copies for the 21 other students in the class. And then the following class, everyone will have read their story and written the author a letter, and we discuss it. So we discuss workshop 2 students per class, and they get all the attention. Yeah. They get all the letters, and it's intense, and it's scary. There's been a lot of Me Too stories coming out in the last 2 semesters. Right. And students sharing stuff that they literally never told a soul about, ever. And it's a safe space. And I had one student who was writing about a sexual assault when she was a minor. And she said her mom kept knocking on her door and coming into her bedroom because she was suspicious. She said, I've never seen you work on any school paper so hard before. Like, what are you writing about? And she was like, don't worry about it. It's for my creative writing class. Like, I got this. And she's still not ready to tell her mom, but that's how into it she was. Even her mom was like, what is going on in here? So, I mean, it's my privilege to support them. But it's also not a free-for-all. I grade everything. I'm not an easy grader. I don't give out a whole lot of A's. It's not a competition of who's had the most traumatic life story. I teach it the way I was taught in grad school. It's a rigorous workshop.
Where did you go to graduate school?
I went to the New School.
Okay. And what's that structure look like? You said that you teach the way that you were taught in grad school.
Yeah, and I don't teach sitting down, again, because I have the nervous energy. So when I was observed last semester, the woman who observed me said I kind of have like an Oprah style, like old school Oprah style, like walk around and like get in somebody's face and like, what do you think? And what do you think? And, but it's taken a few semesters for me to sit back and let the students give their entire like feedback first.
Before you jump in.
Yes. Yeah. And I literally still every class have to stop myself and they all laugh because I'm ready to just like dive in. But I've gotten better at that. I could get better at that for sure. But I facilitate everything because it can't get personal. I want to, the stories are so good that they trigger other stories in the reader's mind. So sometimes the students want to talk about their life that was, but we have to keep it on the page. We have to keep it on the student whose work we're discussing.
Right.
And it's not therapy. It's therapeutic, but it's not therapy. It's not group therapy. I'm not a counselor. Sometimes people cry, but not as often as you would think.
Oh,
like,
that's
hardly
good.
ever, yeah. My office is a different story, but that's okay. But so those are the two classes that I teach over and over.
So how do those classes, particularly creative writing, fit into a criminal justice school? So
I was riding a train home from work yesterday, and this woman started talking to me, and her mom actually went to John Jay, and she asked what I taught, and she was shocked. She's like, I didn't know there was like, an English major there or anything like that. And so it's gotten bigger. Even my therapist, when she learned that, she said, well, how many people are tenured there? How many people are adjuncts there? And I told her, and she was just shocked because it used to be a cop school. But the English department is growing, and also more students want to apply to law school. So having an English major is excellent on your transcript because law school is all reading and writing.
So is it, in some ways, it used to be a cop school, but now is it just like a school?
It's still a criminal justice school. Like I said, there's a lot of people who are intending to do pre-law. It's also a reflection of the media and TV shows and cop shows and Law and Order and a whole generation that grew up watching that stuff. So that a number of them come in and, they don't have a real solid public high school education, and they've been seeing these TV shows, and they're intent on being profilers and going to Quantico and working for the FBI. And so I have to reel them back in. It's amazing to have these dreams and hopes, but you need to learn how to write, Mm-hmm. You need to be clear, you need to be concise. You need strong claims, you need good evidence. So I can trick them into falling in love with reading and writing if I can get them in a comp class and bring in criminal justice issues, whether it's privilege or in cold blood. And the creative writers, they like the outlet. They like the creative expression. It's a pretty laid back class. You can curse, it's creative writing. And a number of them, I basically, it's not my first intention, but I get their self-esteem back up in terms of their writing. And so many of them have been trashed or lashed or put down. And I don't buy that. Like, I can't turn them into, Virginia Woolf or Hemingway or Toni Morrison overnight, but if I can get them from here up to there, right. I'm thrilled. Because they're up there now.
Yeah.
And there's no going back.
Right.
So it's an interesting place to work. And the other, they all have PhDs and masters, and, everyone has a specialty, and my colleagues are incredibly brilliant and hardworking. But they're at John Jay because they need us. Like, that demographic needs us. to help them think and write and read and love that.
And when you say that demographic, is that, how would you characterize the population of John Jay?
So it's mostly young. It's incredibly diverse. It's tilted more heavily towards female at this point, I think. But it's primarily young people of color and a number of people for whom English is their first language. And the vast majority of whom, they're the first to graduate from college, some from high school. I've had homeless students. I've had students come to class after being sexually assaulted on the subway. There's a lot of violence. There's a reason, not just TV shows, but there's a reason why a lot of these students come to criminal justice school, and that's because they've seen in their families or in their neighborhoods like a path that they don't want to choose. Mm-hmm. So they're hungry to learn. They might not have all the tools, but they not only want to help themselves, but they want to give back.
Right.
So those are our students.
That's really great.
It's amazing. I mean, who knows what's going to happen, but I can't imagine being happier teaching anywhere else. These are my people. And I think also as like a middle-aged white lady too, like I know that they see me a certain way, and in all of my classes, like I'll share certain things that I've been through and they can't believe it. I've had relatives in and out of jail and in and out of organized crime and handcuffed to hospital beds. And I've seen a lot and I've been through a lot myself emotionally and financially. And so like it's never like my life story dominates the class. But again, if I'm expecting them to be writing about this really heavy stuff, like I do feel like it's my responsibility to kind of be like, none of us are who you see on the outside, and that includes me too.
Right.
So I'm not going to judge you. Don't judge me. But let's be aware there are certain stereotypes, and I'm in this position of power and whatever. But that's fun for me, telling them something and seeing their face drop, and then they don't look at me the same way. We're all much richer than what's on the outside.
Yeah. I'm interested in that you chose privilege as your topic, and you've chosen in cold blood. Like all of these, you really had free reign to create your curriculum.
Yeah.
So I imagine then that you have sort of a gift in mind, like a takeaway and the seed that you want to plant. And we've talked about that a little bit so far, insofar as like with the creative writing to help people overcome the negative talk that they've heard about themselves up until now. And also there's this thing that you just said about, knowing that everyone's more complicated than what you see. Are there any other takeaways that, I don't want to say as an agenda, but the revelations that you really hope to share or create? Yeah,
and I'm glad that you touched on the fact that I really do, maybe not full reign, but John Jay gives me such freedom and support in designing my courses, as long as they fit the learning objectives, which they all do.
And what are those generally? Just learning
reading, writing, sentence construction, like everything you would expect.
Got it.
But like I taught, another example is I taught a few lit classes when they had more of a need for adjuncts to be teaching lit classes, and they're like one was called Literature of Witness. And I could basically assign whatever I wanted. So I just had them reading novels by Black authors. That's all they read. And so we did a lot of historical context and stuff like that. And Toni Morrison, James Baldwin, Richard Wright, Ralph Ellison. I mean, all of my favorites, Zora Neale Hurston. And then there was a course that is just called Modern Literature or something. And so I was like, let's just have them read women. So I just picked a bunch of women, all different genders and ethnicities, and Dorothy Allison and Maxine Hahn Kingston and Toni Morrison. I love Toni Morrison, so I taught her again. And Sandra Cisneros. And so in both of those classes too, I was so happy because I was ready. If a student came to me and said, I signed up for literature of witness. I didn't sign up for African American literature. Like, why are we reading only Black authors? Or for the women's, like for the modern lit course, I was ready for, in my mind, it would probably be a guy that was like, I didn't sign up for this. Like, why are we only reading women? And these students are ready for anything. They're open to anything. So it's amazing to me that they're not literal. Like I want them to read this stuff and see themselves reflected back. And that if they can do that, I can do that. And that whatever you overcome gives you a tremendous gift and responsibility and edge over people that were born with silver spoons in their mouths. And look at all these books to prove it. And they're so smart that they don't take it literally like you don't they know that they can be inspired by a poor white woman who grew up in the South, even if they're a Latino male or something. So they like reading non-white living authors, and they see themselves reflected not only in the ethnicity of the authors that we're reading, but just in reading these voices that they weren't necessarily taught in high school.
Right.
So I try to just give them the agency that they deserve as a birthright, and that maybe wasn't articulated in high school.
Agency in what way?
And specifically in their writing, getting their voice out, but as far as I'm concerned, in the way that they read and write, and not only in an academic way, because they're under tremendous pressure and stress, and they all work, and they support their households, and that reading can also just be a gift of time, and it slows your heart down, and you can't actively worry about something if you're actively engaged in reading words on a page.
Right.
So they kind of that's part of tricking them too. That, you spend 40 hours a week on your phone, you can spend 20 hours a day keeping a journal, reading.
20 minutes a day?
20 minutes a day, yeah.
Now, how did you end up at John Jay?
So this is a good story. One of the chairs loves telling the story because it was a total lark. So I graduated with my MFA, and I was actively applying for jobs. I probably sent out 60 unsolicited, applications, cover letter, whatever. I'll teach anything, I'll start whenever. And it was just crickets for 2.5 years. And I think I got 2 personal rejections out of maybe 60. And I felt like crap. And then one of my mentors from Hunter, so I finished my BA at Hunter as an undergrad, as an adult,
right,
in my 30s. And he said he's an adjunct, so he was offered his 5th or 6th course to teach. But at John Jay, he said, I can't take any more courses, but I recommended you. And so he sent me an email over the weekend, and I was just exhausted from trying and not getting anything. But Valerie emailed me on Monday morning, 8:00 in the morning, and can we do a phone interview? So we talked, and she hired me in 5 minutes and said, can you get over to HR right now? And of course she was worried that it would bomb. I really had never taught a college class before. I kind of flubbed on my CV a little bit. I have substituted college classes, but I never designed my own curriculum. And I had to start within 24 hours. So I had never done a syllabus.
Yeah.
So I showed up there and I was like, well, what's the worst that can happen? So I'll have a panic attack in front of 27 students. And I don't know, that's the worst that could happen. And I did it. I went up there and I was so nervous. And I've learned since that how you feel on the outside doesn't necessarily come across to other people. Thank God. But I remember writing my name on the board, and my mom was a teacher. My mom was a public high school teacher, and she passed away. We always had she was a horrible relationship. She was an amazing teacher and a very difficult person at home. But I remember writing Professor Harris on the board, and I felt like my mom. And I'm not this hoo-ha sort of person at all, but I was just I felt like her not presence, but I knew I could do it. At least I could get through the class. So the Professor Harris and I taught the class, and afterwards I was like, holy shit, this is really fun. And every class since then, it's like a drug for me. It's a little performative. I'm a Leo. I like to be the center of attention. I like to talk about what I love. I like to get them excited about stuff that I love. So that was it. And so even to this day, Valerie Allen, she's just like, that could have gone much worse. She's the chair, one of the chairs in the English department, and she's like a fantastic scholar, and she teaches literature mostly. But she was like, it has gone much worse. Hiring someone sight unseen, no real experience. And then I just, and the first day just taught me to just keep saying yes. My schedule is wide open. So I was like, yes, I'll take a second class. So I got hired for that class, and then they needed another comp teacher, and then they needed a fiction writer to fill in. So my first semester, I ended up with 3 courses. And I just kept saying yes, whatever they needed. I said yes, yes, yes. And I kept learning, and I kept refining and seeing what works. And so that's how I ended up there. It was just a little luck.
But then tell me if I could be misremembering this, but I feel like last time we spoke, the year whatever ago, that you were saying no to something. That they were offering you like a really, that there was, I don't know if it was at John Jay, but there was some really good opportunity that you turned down.
So this is the tricky part. So I was just talking to someone about this yesterday. So I have incredible mentors, and they want me to stay, and they want me to progress, and they don't want me to be an adjunct forever. But so my attention was being directed to this one job, and it's a 1-year job in which you're teaching like 4 comp classes, and 4, maybe 5 comp classes. It's a lot. It's over 100 students. There's 100 papers to grade every couple weeks, and that's the way to go if you want to eventually keep moving up and up.
So it's like it's a stepping stone from being
an adjunct
to
being a full-time employee for a year. And
so does adjunct just mean part-time? It's
part-time, and there's no job security, and the pay is it's horrible. The union has been trying to get us $7,000 a class. I think it's around $5,000 right now, and there was 6.5 or 7 years where we didn't get any increase in salary whatsoever.
Okay, because are you even represented by the union since you're part-time?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and we got health insurance relatively recently, so that's been huge. But my adjunct friends who have families, and they're working at 3 different campuses, 5 different classes, trying to scrape everything together, paying off grad school bills, or still in grad school trying to get their dissertation finished. So I felt like that was something that I should say yes to. And I talked to friends and teacher friends, and my one teacher friend colleague just said, well, you have to follow your gut. There's what your head is telling you should do, and then there's what your heart is telling you should do. And my heart was saying no. I love teaching, but I won't be able to work on my book. And so I was asked to apply for that, and I didn't. I thought about it, and I wrote back and I said thank you, but I didn't. I said I don't want it.
Right.
So that, there's that, and then there's another. Then the step after that would have been a lecture line, so that you're teaching maybe 3 comp classes and then 1 class that's like a fun class.
So now you're adjunct. Then the 1-year position would have been just a ton of comp classes
for me. Yeah,
and then this. I guess I'm just not familiar with what lecture line.
Yeah,
means.
so that would be like a more permanent position, not just a year. It would kind of be, to my understanding, kind of indefinitely. You can just keep it. It's a decent salary. You're putting in a lot of hours as far as meetings and assessment, and there's a lot more to it. But I just if I was younger, I have a 10-year gap in my education. If I was younger, I would have jumped at any of the opportunities that were put before me.
Yeah.
But I know myself, and I know the way that it takes me forever to grade. I'm very OCD about everything. I overthink everything. I don't think it would be well for me to have 115 students. And I wouldn't be able to give them the attention that they deserve or that I love to give them. And so I'm lucky because I don't have kids to feed. Like, if you do, you just do it. You don't give as much feedback. You have to cut corners. And I could do it, but I don't want to. Like, that would take a lot of the joy out of it. And it would also take a huge amount of time and energy away from my book.
Right. So how does, because you are writing a book, you are a writer yourself. How does teaching fit in insofar as it takes up a lot of your time? Mm-hmm. It doesn't pay very well. And it's all of the time that you give to that is time that's not working on your own book.
Yeah.
And if I'm correct, you're not even, teaching isn't even the thing that's isn't even supporting you fully.
No.
Can you remind me what's covering the gap?
Well, before, I have many reincarnations. So before this, for 7 years, I was a personal assistant to very affluent people, 2 different families. And one I worked with for 4.5 years, and the other was like 2.5 years. And I was able to, I live pretty simply. This is a rent-controlled apartment. I go away, domestically once a year for vacation. But I was basically, when I was a personal assistant, one was kind of like a Trumpian couple. And I was on call 24/7. And the other one was a saint, and she just give me a blank check and say, just pay yourself whatever you feel like you deserve. But I was able to save up a lot of money over 7 years, living well beneath my means. And so that's partly why I'm able to do.
Can I ask how much you were able to squirrel away?
I don't know if I want to say that.
Okay.
But
yeah, I get it. Because I'm not trying to blow up your spot. The point is more to create a realistic picture of what does it take to live and be creative.
Right.
And so I'm certainly in no way trying to pry into.
No, I know.
It's, I guess, the thing that's interesting to me. Not that we have to go into it any deeper, but is the picture you're painting so far mm-hmm. is really exciting. And part of that's the passion that you give off for teaching and the relationship that you have with your students. We haven't gotten into, your own creative work, but I know that you are writing a book, and that you seem to have, time to do that.
Yeah.
But that's not something that somebody else could just step into and make it work in the same way that you do. No. Because you need to have something else to cover the steps and to have an idea of what that is. Yeah, just or you can talk about what's the deficit that how much extra do you need?
It's hard to say too, because I have money that I saved up from that job, but that's not the only money that I have. Because I also, my mother passed away and was kind of cash poor, but my parents had bought a house before we were born. And my brother and I got the house, and it was in a gentrifying neighborhood. And so I took the money that I made from that house and invested it. Got a financial planner to invest it. And so that's also part of my financial package.
Yeah.
So there's the money that I save from working as the personal assistant.
Right.
There's the money I have to fall back on from the sale of the house. And my dad has over the years supported me in some ways. And my dad, my family was not supportive financially for the first 30 years of my life. Really, my grandmother was wonderful. So it's complicated. I've been so poor, and now I feel incredibly cushioned and supportive. And part of, I mean, maybe this is too personal, I don't know, but like I wasn't really close to my dad after my parents divorced for a long time. There was a lot of custody issues. There was no one was helping me pay for anything from when I was a teenager until my 30, basically.
Right.
And my dad came back into my life, and it's like I hadn't really seen child support, and it was hard. I was dropping out of school. I had medical bills. Like, I needed to see a therapist, and I needed to be on medication when I was a kid, and it was really hard. And when he came back into my life, one of my stipulations was I need help financially, and he helped me then, and it was hugely supportive because I was bartending, waitressing. I had dropped out of school. I was writing on the side.
Right.
So he helped me get my BA, and then I could apply to grad school, and then I could start teaching and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, so if I didn't have the money I saved from working, if I didn't have the sale of the house, and if I hadn't had my dad to help me get back on my feet, I would have taken that job.
Yeah. I have one last question sort of on that, in that particular realm, which is, so those are your unique windfalls.
Yeah. And,
as humans, even as artists, windfalls can and do come in different ways. Mm-hmm. Another guy I interviewed for this show was on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. He got $50,000.
Oh my God, that's so funny.
And somebody else I spoke to was on a cruise ship, and when you're on a cruise ship as an entertainer, you don't have any expenses, so you get to pocket all that money, and so then that's another way to develop a windfall.
Yeah.
A friend of mine is currently on the tour of Phantom of the Opera as a dancer, and that's another thing. You're on tour, you don't have a lot of expenses.
Yeah.
That can become a good amount of savings.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you did specifically to make sure that you were using the financial opportunities, the windfalls that you were getting well? So you saw a financial planner. Yeah. Is there anything that you learned that's worth knowing about how to take those and make them last, or to
get help? It's worth hiring a professional if you have any sort of money to invest. And he does a good job. And so I can project into the future. I'm 44 now. So that's why I can say, no, I don't want this job right now. Because I know how much is left,
Right.
And I also know, if it's the right full-time position, sign me up. If it's, teaching 3 creative writing courses and being paid $85,000, sign me up. If it's making $15,000, teaching 5 courses, no, thank you. So it's worth it hiring an expert who's vetted, whom you trust.
Yeah. How do you find vetted experts? Is it just word of mouth, or is there
specifically, my dad said, he works with Edward Jones, so call Edward Jones, and so I called Edward Jones.
Right.
And so, and I'm very honest with him, and I get along with this financial planner very well, and he knows that I'm an artist and that I'm in this really lucky position. But and this is the time that I don't want to be teaching 5 comp classes. This is the time that I have an agent who's been waiting 2.5 years to see this book. So this is not the time to be teaching 5 classes every semester, 10 classes a year. But it's also hard because if and when my book comes out, you don't make a ton of money. It's not like, I'm turning down teaching jobs now to write my book and then the book will be a huge success. I mean, even successful writers don't make a ton of money. Even household names, they don't make a ton of money.
What is that? What would a successful household name person make on a book?
I mean, it totally depends, but looking at my books. I mean, someone like Toni Morrison or Junot Diaz, although he's going through some personal struggles right now. But I mean, they're making, 6 figures. George Saunders, Joyce Carol Oates is, Stephen King is obviously, one of the few millionaires. But But most people, like the literary fiction writers who are winning awards and speaking in colleges, and they're not making six figures. They're not. You get a book advance, and you're paying an agent, and you're paying sometimes a publicist, or sometimes a social media person, and there's not book tours like there used to be. So if you want to promote your book and you're with all of the publishing houses shrunk to like 5 and then to 3 that are all conglomerates of one another. So if you're not with one of those, you're paying out of pocket to fly around the country and stay on people's couches or stay in a cheap motel or something and try to sell a dozen books in a little bookshop or something. And Amazon has taken a lot away from indie booksellers and stores like that. So for all those reasons and more I don't even know about, the agent takes a cut, of course. Writers, it's not like you write your book and then you never have to worry about money anymore either. They're not all optioned into films, believe it or not, or Netflix series or whatever.
So then what does a successful author life look like?
For me? In general?
Yeah. Let's ask and answer both of those questions. So in terms of, perhaps the goal in becoming a writer is purely artistic, but if somebody was thinking like, I'm going to be a writer and I'm going to be successful and then my life will look like X.
A lot of my students think that way.
Is that all a myth? Or is there if you were, the odds are slim or whatever, to be one of those people, but for example, if you were one of those people who is giving talks and is winning awards, you're not making more than 6 figures. You're not even making 6 figures in your book.
No.
So then are you making the rest of your money giving talks?
See, I think, and I remember when you and I first talked after your yoga class, I think we talked about this too. And I think that there's a lot of kind of highbrow writers. This is not everyone, but they're not. There's no transparency. There's no honesty that there's a partner who's been supporting them, or that they have a nanny or something. So that's why I have to own up to getting certain advantages midlife or whatever.
Right.
I lost my train of thought.
Successful, quote unquote, successful writers.
Yeah.
What does that lifestyle look like? If they're not making other money on their book, are they then, if I do a commencement speech, then I get this much money.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And it's speeches. They have to be kind of not a household name, but in order to get $3,000 for a speech, you have to be on the New York Times bestsellers list and stuff like that. So success is very subjective. A lot of even right after I graduated with my MFA, I haven't published that widely, but I won a couple big awards and I was paid well for them in the literary world. Well, thank you. But there are not many of them. And then I graduated with people who have 10 or 20 times the list of publications that I have. But their view of success is just getting published or getting published to the best of their ability. I don't send anything out until I'm 100% behind it. And then I don't care if it's rejected because I'm happy with it and I'll place it somewhere. So I do see a lot of writers. It's all how you define success, writers that are just faster writers and that will publish online and are okay if they, regret sentence structure, the next day or, I'm just not that type of writer. So that sort of success, having all these different bylines, that's not success to me.
Yeah. So what's success to you?
So I want to write the best that I can and then get them placed in the best possible venues that I can. So the best literary magazines that I can. I want the right match, of course, but with that best agent that I can. So I'll do a triage. I'll just start at the top of the literary magazines or the agents and then work my way down.
And is best just prestigious?
Not necessarily. It has to be the right match. With the journals, I I'm familiar with what they publish, and I could see my work being published there. There's no guarantee, of course, that the editor's going to like it or the intern's going to like it.
Right.
But I can see that our aesthetics are similar or aligned. And so through one of my stories that was published that won an award, an agent contacted me, and that was 2.5 years ago. And he said, I loved your story. Do you have a novel? Because no one's interested in stories because they don't make a lot of money until after you publish your first novel. And I said, I have an idea for a novel. And he said, well, send me the first 50 pages when you're ready, but you only get one shot. So don't send the first 50 pages before you're ready. And he's like, if it takes you a couple of years to be ready, send me the first 50, make sure you have the whole thing written. So if I like it, I can say, give me the rest of it.
Right.
And I haven't gotten it to him yet because I'm still writing it.
The first 50 pages?
The first 50 pages I've rewritten about 50 times.
Really? And is that a real number? An actual 50 times?
Yeah. Yeah, rearranged it. Like it started in different spots. Line edits and also I changed it went from first person to third person. It went from 4 first persons to 2 third persons. It went from present tense to past tense. And then every line has been edited just half a dozen times.
Right. So how many drafts of the entire thing have you done?
I haven't finished it, but I guess every chapter has probably been rewritten 2 or 3 times, and some 4 or 5 or 6 times.
And do you write in sequence?
No.
Okay.
So I started doing that, and then I got really stuck in the middle. And one of my writing friends said, "Well, do you know where it ends?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I know where it ends. Yeah, I know how the novel ends. I've known that for the last 2.5 years." And she said, "Well, why don't you write at the end and then write backwards to the middle where you're stuck?"
Right.
And it's like, yes. And so I started doing that. So it's all out of order. So I'll write, I try to write 5 pages a week. It's out of order. And then every 3 months or so, I print everything out. I spread it out on my floor over there, and I rearrange the chapters and then reorder them. And then I get a second opinion. A little feedback, pure feedback.
Who do you tend to go to for that?
So I have one woman that I've been working with for a year, and friends, and she gives me just general feedback. It's a first draft. I don't want line edits because it might not stay in there anyway. So she'll be like, "What happened to this character? He just disappeared. Or do you even need this secondary character? Or your sense of place needs to feel more like a character. Or this isn't funny. This isn't as funny as you think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Or this is for shock value." But mostly it's when I swap writing with someone, it's just write to the end. Just keep writing, keep going right to the end. And anything is fixable. Don't get too precious, caught up.
That's what you lost me for a second. So when you meet with a writing partner and they say right to the end, that's what they're telling you to do?
Just keep going.
Got it.
Just keep going instead of overthinking everything. And my students, this is crap. Who I think major imposter syndrome. I feel like I have so much to prove, and it's what it's like being an artist. It's what do I have to say, and why is this important? And especially if I'm making all these sacrifices, and this isn't, even if it's successful, it's not going to make me a lot of money. And you can't have I can't have those thoughts and produce creatively at the same time.
So how do you set up your time around? You said your goal is 5 pages a week.
Yeah.
Is that the same? Do you write the same days, the same hours? How do you approach those 5 pages when you're writing them?
I wish I was one of those super disciplined, get up, drink a glass of water, and sit at the computer from 5 to 7, and I'm just not. So what works for me right now is that I used to think, I need all these hours to write my 5 pages in 1 shot or 2 shots, and now if I have an hour, I'll sit down and I'll get as much as I can done, and it lowers the expectation. So I often even write more than I normally would. Sometimes I'll write a page and a half. Generally, it takes me about an hour to write a page.
Now, why is that? this is my point of reference, and then you can help work me around. So I'm a big fan of Natalie Goldberg, and I've like read Writing Down the Bones, like tens of times.
Yeah.
And done periods where you're just like, the goal is to just keep your fingers moving.
Anne Lamott is the same. If you've heard of Bird by Bird,
no,
she has a chapter called "Shitty First Drafts," and you would love it.
Yeah, and I feel like I haven't done The Artist's Way, but I feel like there's some crossover there too.
Morning pages.
Yeah. So you could bang out 5 pages in your morning pages like pretty quick.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't sound like that's what you're doing.
No.
And so how do you treat these 5 pages?
Yeah.
Because you're not sitting and just like fingers moving until eventually somehow 5 pages are filled.
I think that's such an important question, and no one talks about it. That's another thing, like money. Like, people don't want to talk about. Everyone's like, this is my favorite nub pen, and this is what I'm reading on my nightstand, and like, this is the font that I like, or whatever. but it's like, there's like National Write a Novel Month or whatever next month, but that doesn't work for everybody. Like, and I'm even like, I know that I'm kind of supposed to be like, shitty first drafts and just keep the pen moving, and I do say all that stuff. But I also say to my students that not all writers are like that, and I'm not like that. A couple of years ago, after I started writing this, I was so frustrated with my low word count, and I felt like everyone I knew was getting published, and their first books were coming out, and I went to grad school with and everything. I decided I'm just going to write crap and just write it as fast as I can. And it was not only crap, I couldn't save any of it. It was just, there's the logic that just get it down on paper and you can fix it later. And but just get anything down on paper, it doesn't work for me, because for me, each sentence leads to the next sentence. I might change it down the line. I'm not married to it. I kill my darlings in the editing process. But I also do a lot of research. This is another thing we're taught not to. I do a lot of research as I write. But the research determines the plot and these incredibly, these moments of synchronicity that I never could have, planned or explained. So I write really slowly. I also have a bit of a background in poetry, so I can't just write straight through. So I read everything out loud, too, and print things out, so that slows it down. But I'm just trying to write fast. It's almost useless to me, because I can't salvage anything and I can't get that time back.
And then how does that work? If you're doing research as you go, then how much do you know before you start? Because it's not like it doesn't sound like you've done all the research and the whole thing has been charted out, and then you just have to deliver.
Right.
It sounds like you're figuring it out as you go.
Yeah.
So, but at some point, you knew you had an idea, and you said you've known the ending for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
So at the very least, you had an idea and an end.
Yeah.
But I imagine, based on all research, that could all change. So what is the seed that you start with? How much can or does it evolve as you go?
Yeah. These are such good questions, Al. These are questions that writers should be asking other writers, and they don't. But I don't understand it, but they don't. And research is one of those things that, I've always included research in my fiction. And I'm shocked that other people don't. And because it's such an inspiration. Because, it's like people are like, oh, if that was in a book, you never believe it. Because life is stranger than fiction. But it's also a slippery slope, because I've been researching this for actually longer than 2.5 years, because I've always been interested in my themes. And in the beginning, I was stalled in the writing because I thought I had to do all the research first. And then I eased up on it. And I used to have all these documents out and all these different, all across the wall. I looked crazy. And the writing suffered because it was so dry. It was nonfiction. It was I was trying to, there's amazing facts and everything, but I was trying to cram them in my characters' mouths. So So I have a bunch of books that I read and underlined and everything, but I don't consult my notes anymore. It's kind of like whatever sticks in my head from the research sticks in my head. But I do still kind of fact check a little bit along the way. But I don't know, it works for me. It springboards me into the next creative idea. Or I do a lot of image searching, and that helps with my description. But it's tricky because if I wasn't doing all this research, I guess you could say maybe I would have finished by now, but it wouldn't be as rich and it wouldn't be as authentic.
Right.
And I really enjoy the research too, but it can also be used as a procrastination device.
Right.
Which I'm aware of.
Right. But I think, I don't know, I've thrown that out for myself in the creative process, is the procrastinating on topic is fine.
Okay.
If I set aside time to like write jokes instead of watching somebody else's thing, I'm learning.
Yeah.
And if like I don't watch like physical comedy and clown outs like at my apartment that much, so I mean it'll come and go, but I'll book 3 hours of rehearsal, and sometimes all 3 hours that I'm in the theater I'm on my feet like working out bits and going through it, and sometimes the first hour is watching YouTube videos.
Yeah.
And as long as it's on topic and it gives me, as long as it's filling the well,
yes,
it's useful.
Yeah.
So
and that's
I've given up on.
Yeah, no,
being hard on myself about filling the well.
I think you're very wise to do that, and I try to do that, and I still don't always succeed. But I mean, there have been times when it's like I say I'm going to sit down and I'm gonna physically write, and it's down the rabbit hole of research. But then I get 3 or 4 good ideas on where to start the next chapter.
Right.
And I mean, anything where we're just not beating ourselves. I mean, we could be doing anything other than like research that would be a lot worse. We could be smoking crack or something, So yeah, I should be more like you in that respect. Like I still think, I didn't get my 500 words in or whatever.
Right.
But I like that idea of eating the well.
So because you're discovering it as you go, what do you need to start? Meaning, since there's so much discovery in the process, how big does the spark need to be to get you going?
Yeah. It's different for everyone. Right?
Okay.
Like for me, my book is about undercover FBI agents who infiltrate a radical animal rights group that is considered domestic terrorist cell. So I've never written a novel before. So I knew there had to be issues that I've always been interested in and I always will be interested in.
And what are the,
under the psychology of being undercover, because we're all undercover for something or other. We all have secrets. We all present certain parts of our personality to certain people in a certain way. It's like with the undercovers, there's this interesting polarity of like what they do for work versus really infiltrating, like really winning people over into their confidences and wearing different masks. And so who are you if you're one person in work and one person with your lover and one person breaking into like a laboratory and freeing rabbits or something. So I really like also the criminal justice stuff. So I really like the FBI undercover stuff. And then I've always been like into animal rights and activism and ethics and vegetarianism and toying with veganism. And so I've watched so much of the horrific factory farming videos and always have. And so I knew that I know those two worlds to a certain degree, and I've researched a lot about them, and I've interviewed people that have been in both of those worlds. And it's where they combine in my book that's also happened in real life, where the undercovers become romantically involved with the activists.
Right.
So which is not legal or ethical, and sometimes the activist is impregnated by an undercover who's just playing a role. And this has happened. Like, this is real. I'm not making this up. So, so like, I knew that that's not a short story. So that's a book. So I need themes that I care about that will not get old, that I've been thinking about for 25 or 30 years. And I always need, and characters that that are messy and complicated. And regardless of gender, like, I have two main characters, and so they're very different. It's male and a female undercover. And I decide from whose perspective I'm writing based on how I'm feeling that day. If I feel more like Cheryl, I write from Cheryl's perspective. If I feel more like Bobby, I write from Bobby's perspective. So I have these themes I'm interested in. I have these characters that are really messy and flawed in ways that I can relate to. And I can put them to work for me emotionally. If I'm feeling a certain way, then which character is more close to the way I'm feeling? And then the last thing I think is sense of place. Like, sense of place is really important to know that. So the themes, the characters you can relate to, and the sense of place, because you're always going back to the sense of place.
What does that mean to you?
Like, the book really came alive when I started setting it in Santa Fe. And it was the first time I ever went to Santa Fe. And I did Airbnb, and I rented this dome, this geodesic dome. And and the owners of the dome they're in their early 70s, and they met in art school here, Cooper Union. And they're like activists and Buddhists, practicing Buddhists, and amazing artists, sculptors, painters. And I just, I drove all over. I had my aunt's car, drove all over the place. I went to Taos Pueblo. I bought this painting, and it was just a magical, the sky, went horseback riding, camped out. And it wasn't my intention, but that's where the book had to happen. So unless I have a sense of place, the place needs to be a character in the book. And I didn't want it to be another New York City book.
Right.
So it's important. And I didn't have it for the first year or year and a half I was writing, and it showed. People would be like, oh, the writing's good and the characters are interesting, but there's no background, there's no backdrop.
Yeah. And then how do you go about creating characters? That's something where I know I have a huge imposter syndrome, and so my one-man show is nonverbal, mm-hmm. and that's on purpose. Mm-hmm. The stand-up is largely taken from my life, or my observations. Mm-hmm. I have ownership of it.
Yeah.
These are my thoughts.
Yeah.
But for a little while, in graduate school, had thought about toying with playwriting.
Where did you go to grad school?
Brown University Trinity Repertory Company. So
it was for drama? Or?
It was for acting.
It was for acting.
But what I really loved about that program, and why I chose that, was that they really encourage you to be a complete artist. Mm-hmm. So you're getting intensive conservatory actor training, but there's also a directing component. And I studied directing in undergrad. I had a theater company for a few years in San Francisco where I directed a fair amount. And so I liked that they included that
absolutely.
Part.
See it from the director's perspective.
Yeah. And just that there wasn't, at least there, the grad school wasn't going to tell me to choose. It was okay to be both.
Yeah.
And that there's a place to be both.
That's great.
And then they also had a playwriting component that you could opt into. Everyone had to take it for, I think, the first semester, if not the first year, but then after that it was optional.
Did you like that part of it?
I did, but I think that I liked being in the room. It was the one room in the MFA program where you were really creating something versus interpreting something.
Yeah.
And so the playwriting instructor, Deb Salem-Smith, was lovely and a passionate teacher, and brought in so much. So I like being in that room. And that was the incubator where I came up with my one-man show.
Oh,
but it wasn't the place. Other people I felt like could write dialogue. I can conceive plot and story, but I feel like a fraud when I need to actually like put words in other people's mouths and make them seem different.
Yeah. That was the last thing to fall into place. Well into my mid to late 20s was dialogue.
So I have the opportunity right now to write a short film. And
great.
I wrote a short version with minimal dialogue and felt really good about that. But I'm being asked to make a longer version of it.
Yeah.
And really crapping out because it's not just two people, but now they need to be like two characters, like who are messy and whole and
who
human.
speak differently.
Yes. Yeah. And these are things that's really freaking me out. How do you own that? Put yourself in a place because you're one person with one voice, but then you have to create these other people who aren't you with different voices. Yeah. How do you feel I don't know how to say this other than, how do you feel like you have the right to do that? Like, how do you own your ability, to do that?
Well, like, the characters are different parts of me. They're still parts of me. And I know them. Like, I know myself. And I hate parts of them that I hate about myself. And I love parts of them that I love about myself. And it's funny. It never struck me not to. Like, that I didn't have the right to do this, or because I'm not actually making things up like out of the blue. Like, I'm basing their life experiences on my life experiences, or things that I've heard secondhand or witnessed. So I've always been like, the character part has always come easy to me.
Oh, that's great.
Because and also, like, what I don't know, I do research.
Right.
And I interview people who have worked in these jobs or whatever. So I feel like I've kind of earned the right to write about them.
So, having not been an undercover agent,
right,
you have the confidence in the volume of research that you've done that you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and what I don't know what I'm talking about, someone else will fix it. I just have to tell myself there'll be a fact checker, there'll be like, an editor at the publishing house or whatever, and I have to think that that's what's going to happen, and that'll be their job to make sure I don't get sued or whatever, or that, not that I would be sued, but that I also don't, I was concerned about insulting people. Like, of course I want it factually to be correct, and I have to accept that factually I'm going to get a bunch of things wrong. But I have tremendous respect for the armed forces, for the FBI, for the police. That's why I love teaching at John Jay in part. And I also have tremendous respect for the animal rights activists.
And it's coincidence, right, that you ended up at John Jay?
Completely.
Okay.
Yeah, which is also another weird layer. But yeah, so I can't really dwell on it, but there is, like, if and when the words do get out there in this day and age, there's going to be pushback. I don't think anyone in the FBI is really going to care, because there's all these genre books, about cops and everything. But, like, I definitely wouldn't want to enrage any animal rights activists if I didn't do justice to the cause. Like, I'm more concerned about that audience. But I have to consciously not let that stop me or worry me too much, and just be like, I'll get a beta reader. I'll ask an animal rights activist to look over the manuscript and see if there's any, like, really appalling things going on. But also, like, the characters are flawed, and they're fuck-ups, and they're, like, they're immoral, and they're selfish, and they're messy, just like we are.
Right.
So, it's fiction. These are not great people that I'm writing about. I never write about great people. It's always some sort of ethical ambiguity of what's going on. And the interesting thing to me is that the undercovers are in a lot of ways worse than these so-called domestic terrorists.
Right.
In what they're doing illegally. But the characters, so to circle back, the characters that's my favorite part of the book. And I'm really I write selfishly exercising my own demons. And so just like with my students, there are things that I'm just very brutally honest about that I've been through. Like I make my characters expose themselves in ways, and it feels good. It feels good for me to get that out.
It's something that's really impressive is the comfort that you seem to have with your psyche. Insofar as I know a lot of people, everyone's complicated. Everybody's fucked up.
Yep.
Everybody in their life has had trauma, big T or little t. But most people not only present one version of themselves, but really try to only believe one version of themselves.
That's interesting, yeah.
And so I don't think a lot of people would have access to particularly the unattractive, the unpleasant, the mean parts of themselves. Not to say those are the parts that you're tapping.
They're there.
But the self-censorship isn't only self-censorship in what you express, but it's also, what you let yourself see in yourself. And so to have such personal access and courage to share it I think is really extraordinary.
Thank you for saying that. It's a lot of therapy.
Yeah.
And as a child, before I had the tools, it was not letting it out, and I was majorly depressed and suicidal into my mid-20s. So for about 10 years.
Yeah.
So not getting it out personally and not getting it out through my characters doesn't work.
Right. Bottling it up really is not a healthy option.
It will destroy you. Yeah.
So is that when writing came in, or were you a writer before that?
I was always a writer, and I was always encouraged to be a writer. I got a scholarship at a private school. It was a Quaker school, so it was very liberal and politically active and creative and writing across the curriculum and multicultural before there was such a thing. And I always had amazing English teachers that were kind of like therapists too. And they had my back, and they supported me, and they supported me after I graduated. But I have to, when I teach, I do teach in this raw way, and I'll present myself as this flawed human being. But I'm not a social worker, and I'm not a counselor. So I did just tell someone this week that she wasn't ready to write about something. Because she's not ready to write about something. Because she couldn't talk about it without crying. That's not the time to write about something, So it's a fine line, and sometimes I worry, and I've never had to worry, thank God. But it's, I can do it because I'm my age, and I've had so much therapy.
Right.
But it's tricky, you can't write about something before you don't want to make things worse. I would never encourage anyone to re-traumatize themselves.
Is that possible? Because I know from you listen to your other podcast that there's also some science about writing about things can change the way that it is in your brain.
Yep.
So are both of those things true?
Yes.
By writing about it, you can actually do it to yourself all over again,
yes.
or make it all better?
Yes. You have to be, and who can define this but you have to be ready to, I just had a student who wrote about being sexually assaulted by his father his whole life. And he's been through years of therapy, and he was ready to talk about it. And then the other young woman was writing about wanting to find her birth father who had raped her mother that she had never met before. And she was bawling talking about it. And I said, don't write about that. It's not time to write about that. You're already hurting yourself. Look at yourself. You deserve better than that. Do it in 6 months. Do it in a year. But for the young man, and he was gay and he was Muslim, and so there were all these different layers to it. He was 100% ready.
Yeah.
To write about it, and it's their choice. But yeah, when I was their age and I was writing about stuff, it was in a very masochistic way, and it didn't make me feel any better. It was very poor me, woe is me, self-pitying, whether I deserved it or not, and it didn't make me feel any better. And then when I got older, I started writing fictionalizing like putting my feelings into characters. And that's when the closure came. So when I like cite the scientific studies, it's in when you're in a better place. And I think if you do it too soon, you can re-traumatize yourself. And I don't believe in trigger warnings. It's not like that. But I think that everyone has to be honest about what they're ready to. It's like if you're in a bad emotional space, you shouldn't look for a partner. You should look for an intimate partner because it's not fair to them. You're not being fair to yourself. So it has to be the right time.
Right. And is that also different in terms of writing? With the scientific studies, is fictionalizing your experience more likely to help you re-understand it in a new way versus writing it as a nonfiction?
I don't know. I don't think that the studies separated them.
Okay.
Like in my experience, I just don't write a lot of creative nonfiction. But as far as the emotional closure I get, I would imagine it would be the same. Mm-hmm. I just gravitate towards fiction. But, I mean, I've written myself into my characters' lives in ways that I've never told anybody about, like not even therapists.
Right.
But then I somehow get this idea I'm going to put Cheryl through this experience that I had when I was 28 or whatever. And enough time has passed, and it's protecting me because it is fiction. So a lot of the things that they not everything, but a lot of the things that they went through, I went through. And it feels good. Like one of the stories that I published was about kind of a snuff film, and it was set in the Chelsea Hotel, and it was kind of violent and very sexually degrading for the character. And I'd been through not exactly that, but similar traumas as a young woman, like late teens and early 20s. And writing that was it was empowering. And it was from a safe distance, too. So I think that's the right combination of having enough time go by, having enough self-knowledge, and just being ready to.
Mm. What role, because it's come up a number of times, do you feel that therapy has in the life of an artist, in the creative?
That's like a whole other conversation. Well, for me, it was necessary because I was clinically depressed my whole life, and it got really bad in my teens. And I was self-medicating in different ways, and that continued into my 20s and interfered with school and relationships and jobs. And so I've had a bunch of therapists on and off, again, depending on whether I had health insurance or whatever. And some of them didn't help at all. And some of them were actually kind of bad for me. And then some of them were amazing. So I had one therapist here, and she just passed away this year. And I saw her for 7 years. And she was like my surrogate mother. And she was not professional and said, like, I don't even know if she has a degree. But when I was a personal assistant, I walked the couple's dogs, these mini dachshunds, and I walked them with another artist who lived in the Chelsea Hotel because that's where my clients lived at the time. And she was a dominatrix and she was a sculptor. And I said, I just fired my last therapist. I need a new therapist. I'm so sick of therapy. I have to start all over again. And she said, oh, you should go to my therapist. She's an angel. She's like, every time I see her, I want to bring her a gift. She has this big, like, curly white head of hair, and she's Irish, and she has these piercing blue eyes. And you go to her railroad apartment on the Upper East Side, and her dog sits in your lap, and she brings you ginger tea, and you're sitting in a rocking chair, and there's a room full, there's records and books and no TV and no internet, and I was like sold. So I started seeing her, and she just got me on the road to recovery as far as, like, I was a mess. I was doing drugs and drinking and depressed and, like, you know, just having no self-respect for my body and my health. And I had gone back to school at Hunter to finish my BA, and I was like, I'm so smart, I can take 5 classes, I'll be done in 2 years. And I can still, you know, work my job 50 hours a week. My life is chaos. And so she was the one that said, take 2 classes and work 20 or 30 hours a week. And I was on academic probation at that point. And I tell all my students this. I was almost kicked out of Hunter College. And then I cut my work hours and cut my class schedule. And then I was getting A's and graduating with honors and got a scholarship for grad school and won awards and stuff like that. So if it wasn't for that, I don't know where I would be right now.
Yeah.
But again, it has to be the right person at the right time. And I just got lucky. I found her.
Right.
But that's how important it is for me.
And so you're going through the time, I don't know, the messy time. And then you're in Hunter, and you cut down your class load, start doing very well. And I guess what I'm looking to chart right now is, like you're set up as a professional writer at this point. And was that as linear as it sounds?
Yes.
Hunter, were there any like steps along the way that were like, because if somebody wants to be a professional writer, I'm thinking like, what is the path? Okay. What are the replicable things, and what are the things that were like lucky and not replicable?
Got it. Yeah. So, I went back to Hunter, but when I moved here in 99, and by 2001, I was taking continuing ed classes at the new school. It was a fiction course at night. And I met like my main mentor, Jackson Taylor. He started the MFA program at the new school. He's since moved on. But so I started taking classes with him in 2000, and then was a mess, and then started Hunter and was a mess in Hunter, and then got on the ball. And all those times, like I've known Jackson for like 17 years now. Like I kept going back to him. He'd have private workshops. He'd have workshops. Media Bistro. He'd have workshops in his home. He'd have workshops in his agent's office. And I kept in touch with him, and I kept going back to his workshops when I was a mess, when I was clean, whatever. And so when I looked like I was finally going to graduate from Hunter after 4.5 years, and that was as a transfer student. So it was
So as a transfer student,
it took me another 4.5 years.
If you did that full time, that would be 2 years.
That would have been, because I had 2 years going in.
Right, so 2 years going in.
Yeah.
So hypothetically, it could have been 2 years going out.
But if I was not me, if I was another person. Yeah. So when I was graduating from Hunter, and I kept taking Jackson's workshops, and he knew I was graduating, and he was like, I can get you into the new school, basically. And so this was my own doing, even when I was a mess, because I started studying with him as soon as I got here.
Yeah.
For no credit, just not a commitment, like 6 weeks at a time or whatever, 8 weeks at a time. So the month that I graduated from Hunter, I literally started at the new school.
You said you had a scholarship.
They give scholarships. They're not that generous, but he managed to get me more because of our relationship.
Right.
And so that was just like burn. And then things slowed afterwards because I couldn't get a teaching job. But then I got the John Jay job. But
you were saying that at some point you wrote stories that got awards and were published.
Yeah.
And that gets you an agent.
That could.
But that did, right?
Got an agent's attention, yes.
Yeah, got an agent's attention. So were those stories that you wrote, were those just assignments for your MFA? You were like, well, these are good, I'll send them around.
Yeah, well, they don't give us assignments. We have a deadline for a story to submit. And both the stories that were published and that won awards had been workshopped in the class.
So in the MFA program, they say you need to write and set and submit to the greater world a story by this date. So actually sending it out to publications is part of it?
No. You just submit it to the workshop.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. And in the new school, I went to AWP, I went to different writers' conferences, but there were weekend workshops on how to get published and get an agent and stuff like that. So I got a lot of knowledge out of it, but that's not actually, publishing isn't part of the curriculum in the new school. It's very craft-based.
That's the same.
It's the same thing.
At the acting school, there isn't really anything about auditioning or getting a job or understanding the industry. It's all craft-based. Right.
And I wish that it was more balanced, a little towards the real world stuff. But I learned everything I needed to submit stuff, and I learned about literary magazines on my own a lot. I wish that at my MFA, I wish that plot was stressed more. I know plot is like, of course you need a plot, but plot wasn't really taught or talked about. It was craft. So I felt like I kind of had to learn on my own a little bit because I was behind. But after...
Why were you behind?
As far as plot, I was still writing a little too abstractly when I started my MFA. Like I felt like I was learning a lot about plot, like my last semester.
Right, like you felt like you were behind. There was no measure that you were empirically behind.
No, but it wasn't. It was like the dialogue. It just took longer to learn.
Got it.
That aspect. And so I worked on these two. I wrote the stories. We workshopped the stories. I got a lot of feedback from teachers and classmates, and I knew that they were done. They were just, that was the best that I could do them. It was part of my, it's not a dissertation, but like your final whatever portfolio manuscript. And then I just started submitting them, and I submitted them each to 30 different journals. I started at the top, and
Is there still a list somewhere?
I made one.
Okay.
Of like my dream journals, like that I think are a good match, and they were rejected 29 times and accepted, once. And some of those I retracted it because it had won the award, so then I had to tell the other magazines, forget it, it's not available anymore.
Right.
But it was a lot of rejection.
Because you submitted it and then it won an award, and so then it couldn't be published anywhere else?
Well,
that connection, you just lost me there.
The copy, it can't be published in more than one magazine at all.
Right.
And if one magazine selects it first, you have to tell all the other magazines where you submitted it that it's taken off the table. That's what you should do, or it could be blackballed forever. But I got a ton of rejections, and it was interesting because it didn't bother me because I knew that the stories were as good as I could get them. Right. So I submit them everywhere, and I get rejected in most of the places. And then, I finally got, for both of them, I got in journals that are amazing journals and really well known. And I'm happy that there's, and I was paid for them. And I still, if I'm feeling down, like I'll reread them. I really like them. I moved by them. And that's 2 stories out of hundreds, so it's not a lot, but I feel like they're timeless, and I feel like they're representative of me and my ability and my thought, my creativity, and they're kind of gross and they're kind of funny, and so then I think the publications also helped me get hired at John Jay. Right.
Somewhere in there was an award. There were awards, and there was something getting
published.
Yeah. So what's the award, and when did that happen?
For one of the stories that was published, it won first prize for a fiction award.
At that magazine?
At that magazine.
Okay.
So they said they were going to publish it, and then they, I guess, simultaneously said it won first place for a fiction competition.
Did you know that you were submitting it for a competition?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I did. And it's kind of like if you win, then it's published. So it's both. So it's all wrapped up.
Got it.
And same for the other one. So that was the normal school. That was the normal prize. And then Missouri Review was the other one, and they have an editor's prize contest. And I submitted it to that. And there's no guarantee of publication. Like they could. Typically they're going to publish like the runners up or whatever. But I got a runner up in that, and they published it. But there's no guarantee that they were going to publish it. It fit in with the theme issue, I guess, and they liked it. It was good timing. So that was an award too. It wasn't first place, but it's like a bigger magazine.
Yeah.
So those happened, and it's it was amazing, and it was great, and it's also all these years later, and I haven't placed anything. I haven't been paid for anything. I haven't published anything. I haven't really submitted too much. So that's on my mind too, that like these 2 things happened. I got really lucky right after I graduated grad school. And then in the 4 years after that, or 3.5 years after that, since that stuff happened, I've just been teaching. Not just, but I've been teaching. Right. And working in a book. I don't work on stories when I'm working in a book.
So you only have one creative project cooking at a time?
Yeah. In the beginning, I was juggling short stories with the book, and I couldn't. It was not working. I just wanted to focus on the book. So part of the imposter syndrome too is like there are these 2 great, gifts that I was given, and then there's no part of me out in the world right now being published. It's in the works, but like that stresses me out.
Sure. I mean, to your credit, though, it sounds like you got an opportunity that doesn't sound like it has an expiration date, apart from you only get to submit your first 50 pages once.
Yeah.
But so with finishing graduate school as an actor, you get a showcase, and what I heard while we were in school and then discovered to be true immediately after is that just by being the new shiny thing on the block, you're going to get more opportunities for maybe the first 3 months.
Okay.
And then you're just like everybody else. Then the dust is settled. The feeding frenzy's died down.
Is this true?
Huh?
Is that true?
Yeah. At least, I think so.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there are exceptions, and maybe these are... maybe this is all bullshit I'm making up, but
no, I'm sure
I've heard this in the world.
Yeah, yeah.
And it did seem to be reflective that when you're first graduating, everyone, all of the casting directors, all of the agents, you don't know who any one of these people might be the next big thing.
Right.
And so there's this energy, there's this FOMO that's driving the economy of like, well, I've got to go for it because I want to be the person who snags the next big thing.
Yeah.
But then by 3 months later, you're either a big thing or you're not. And now they're like, well, like,
3 months.
Moving on.
Terrible.
Yeah. And so that I regret not moving to New York sooner. I stayed in Rhode Island for that summer. And it was psychologically a good thing for me.
Yeah.
I wanted to say goodbye to graduate school before I said hello to New York.
Yeah.
I wanted to end a chapter before starting a new one rather than making those transitions one on top of another. But I do feel like there were more concentrated opportunities at that particular period of time. And I still took buses into New York and did those auditions. But had I also then been taking classes and just being around and more present while there was the glitter of the new thing, I regret missing that. But in your case, it sounds like you got this exposure. It got you an opportunity that's sitting very patiently.
As long he's older too.
Oh, so
he's like, send me your best, but remember, I'm getting up there, So there actually is yeah. I mean, he has a whole agency, but it's still
that was something else that was challenging for me. Was I got some meetings in LA with agencies I wanted to work with, but I knew I wanted to move to New York, and that didn't really translate. It was well, these are the people who are interested in you, and this other office doesn't have people who are interested in you. So even though it's the same umbrella, that's not, you weren't really the same lateral moves.
Yeah.
So I get that, where you, even though there are more people in that office, you have the one person.
You made that connection.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because you would think too, I relate it to this 3 month, window of opportunity too, a little bit differently. But a lot of these stars of MFA programs are also privileged in their own way, or fit some look, hip, cool, tattooed, skinny, model attractive looking.
Use them even as writers.
As writers.
Really?
100%.
So even as writers, 100%. It favors the hotties.
Yes.
Shit. Okay.
Conventionally, and things are changing a little bit, but if you're a young, conventionally attractive, white woman around in your late 20s, early 30s, it's a huge advantage. Huge. You can present well, you can promote well, you take pictures well. It's mostly women reading fiction, so you're appealing to your target audience. So I was at least 10 years older than everyone I went to school with. So I saw this happening, and I saw who was getting book deals and attention. And it's hard not to take it a little personally. And there's a lot of ageism, even among writers. In one of the stories that I wrote, there was a young kid in my class, early 20s, and my protagonist was 37 at the time, and she had multiple partners, and was her her fiance had just been killed in the World Trade Center, and she was a little bit of a sex addict. And this guy's comment was that my story was unrealistic because no woman that age could get 3 guys at the same, like, could be like having sex with 3 different guys. P.S. I was 37 at the time, and he was trying to sleep with me. So that's like an added layer to it of hypocrisy, of bullshit. And he wasn't making the connection either. But there's sexism. There's the feeling that also, like, it's not only the author's age, it's the character's age. It's like, who wants to read, like, in my novel, I kind of figured out this summer that, like, Cheryl, my protagonist, is starting menopause. And it's like, there's going to be, like, you know, most people would be like, who the fuck wants to read a book about a menopause, like, premenopausal FBI agent? Well, guess who buys books? It's mostly women. It's mostly, like, middle-aged women. But that's not preferred, even in books.
Wow.
To have women that are representative of, like, women that are even buying the books. Like, they want the young, good-looking characters. They want the young, good-looking authors. Also the hip and the cool and whatever.
Right.
That has no reflection on the quality of the writing either. So that, the ageism, not only the sexism, but the ageism is just, it's rampant.
Yeah.
Which is such a surprise, because you think, being a writer, it's like, so, I don't know how my friends that are like actors or models or, like, even musicians on stage are like, it's looks, and you think being a writer, you're immune to that. Not at all. It's, you know, much less severe, but it's still so much there.
Wow. I never would have thought that.
Yeah, I know. And it's only because, like, I've gotten older, and there are women that are older than me that have been talking about it, and so it's been on my radar. Like, that's going to be me in a few years, and now it's kind of me.
What?
Just, like, you know, I'm now the middle-aged writer. I'm not the, like, you know, delinquent, like, crazy 20, 30.
Oh.
The author writing about crazy 20, 30
so
year old.
your type has changed.
Yeah.
I'm just so taken aback, because, again, that's something I think of as, like, as an actor, the way that I will be seen by an audience, because you're seeing me.
Yes.
But since the author isn't there, and I don't know, and, like, not all authors have a picture on their book jacket.
Mm-hmm. Most do, though, now.
Do they?
Absolutely.
Oh.
It's part of the packaging, and maybe I'm, like, I don't feel like I'm exaggerating it, because I'm in it, and a lot of older writer friends are in it, like, female writer friends are in it, but I think it's a little taboo. It's a little taboo, like writers don't want to talk about how hard it is to write, or that they get blocked too, or they don't want to talk about money. I think that there's, like, that we're not supposed to talk about ageism and sexism, and it's specifically sexism. Like, men can age gracefully or whatever. But I think that, like, that should, it's a really relevant conversation that needs to be happening more often.
Yeah. Now, I'm planning to make a left turn right here.
Okay.
But before I do, so writers should be talking more about their process.
Yes.
We should be talking more about ageism.
Yes.
We should be talking more about money.
Yes.
Do you have any other topics that people, or, you know, that writers don't like to look at but affect their success in their life in the industry?
I mean, I would say, like, also something that really ticks me off is kind of othering, like, is like microaggressions as far as race, going back to privilege, because it's like every 4th or 5th or 6th book that I read, it's, you know, if it's by a white person, male or female, and it's a fantastic book, I always get to a point where it's like a character walks into the room and is described as a person of color, as an Indian woman or a black man or an Asian woman or whatever. And so that just says that if I don't color this character in a certain light, that it's assumed that the character is white, because the characters are it's never a white guy across the street.
Right.
It's like a Latino guy, like, crosses, and it's in so many, it enrages me that still happens.
Yeah. This is something I just don't know. But like in my daily life,
Mm-hmm.
I'll say a guy crosses the street,
Mm-hmm.
and it could be any guy of any color.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not specific. If at that point the essential information is simply gender street, gender action street,
Right.
and I'm sure that there are people who might argue that like the gender isn't relevant; it's just a person street. But if your job is to paint a picture of something that isn't really happening in the mind of a reader, then how much is it othering and how much is it just descriptive? Or is the problem that we didn't care to describe these people, but we're describing these
That's
other
the problem,
people?
is that the only people that are described by their race are non-whites.
Got it. So it's if we said everybody's race, it actually wouldn't be an issue.
I mean, it would be kind of bad writing, but yeah. But if you were like this white guy and this white woman and this the Asian man and this black man.
So what's the solution that's good writing? If saying everybody's race is bad writing, but you want to paint a multicultural picture where we know that there are, Latino people and Chinese people and Indian people, then what's the workaround?
This is the old cliche that I still stand by. It's the show don't tell. It's like show. It's not the first. You don't have to. Race isn't like the first thing you need to describe in a character, but if it's essential to the storyline, and sometimes the race is not essential to the storyline, and it's up to the reader to decide however they want to picture them. But like, why is someone also when the characters of colors are described by their race, the race isn't actually part of what makes them interesting as a character at all. It's not even part of the plot. It's like a shorthand for something. Right.
Well, there was a short stint I did. I got hired at one point to write a screenplay through a weird connection. I was working at a breakfast restaurant, and a celebrity's manager frequented the restaurant. And I would talk to him about a show I was directing. And he's like, "Oh, you direct, do you write?" And somewhere I think I heard, like, don't say you want to be a writer, say you are a writer.
Yes.
So he said, "Do you write?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Great, I've got, we're working on the screenplay idea. Would you take a pass at it?" Mm-hmm. And I said, "Yes," having never written a screenplay. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote my way through the screenplay, and I was, of course, reading books on it at the time.
Yeah.
And there's this very famous book on screenwriting called Save the Cat, and it's got tricks for how to structure a screenplay, suggestions on how you might go through the developmental process. But then there's also a section at the end about doctoring, about how do you fix things and fix its notes, things like that. And so one of the notes is the tricks is called a limp in an eye patch, and that you can have particularly minor characters or secondary characters, but you can have characters in a screenplay that feel like they're not working, even though, they have their role in the plot, they have their relationships with the other people, but they're just nondescript, and so you can't place them. And so if you give them a detail that you then mention every time the character comes up, it colors them with something, so then they live in the imagination of the reader.
What was it, Kaiser Sose or something? Is it Reservoir Dogs? Or...
Kaiser Sose is The Usual Suspects.
Usual Suspects, right.
Yeah. But again, so that particular trick is stuck in my mind as the value and the necessity to give people a distinguishing detail, whether or not it's actually tied to the plot or whether it's relevant. You just have to give people a hook, something that they remember and hold on to. Mm-hmm. And I guess that doesn't have to be race.
Right.
But could that be something that's going on, or is that a fair thing to do? We need to color this character so that they're not just, bystander number 4.
Right. Yeah.
So to make this person different than the last person we spoke to, I'll make them ethnically different. Is that fair? I guess
it depends on the context.
Problem solver.
If it's during the Civil War or it's set in the Black Lives Matter movement protest, we need to. That's important. My main problem is if you're not saying that a character is white, why are you only labeling the other characters who are of color by their skin tone.
Right.
It's just a pet peeve of mine, and I see it in award-winning books.
Yeah.
And writers of color never do that.
Right.
They never do that. It's always white writers that do that.
So it's we have plenty of examples of people who don't do that. So it's sloppy and unnecessary.
Yeah. And just like my students do this too. This is describing like a person's skin color. If they are a person of color, don't compare them to chocolate or coffee or anything like that. Like that's another thing that I see, like cafe au lait complexion or The students are sometimes too literal when I'm like, oh, use visceral description and sensory description and see, hear, smell, touch, taste, and describe the character. And then I get that's a skin color of like cappuccino, and they're 5'7", and they have a part down the middle, and they have it's like non-important details too.
Yeah, which Natalie Goldberg would call it marrying the fly.
Marrying the fly.
Which is where you paint the picture to the lengths that you're describing the unuseful details.
Yes.
You're now describing the fly and where it's going and the color of its wings.
There's so much of that.
You just needed to know that there's a cafe and there are flies.
Right.
We've talked a little bit about what success means to you in terms of writing, that it's having your work published in places that are good fits.
Mm-hmm.
And then what is success in the bigger picture, and sort of as an artist with a whole life? How do you imagine that? Do you feel like you're already there? Or is there something,
no.
Like what's the next thing what's the dream look like?
I mean, I'm good with my process right now, but like I'm not one of those writers that just obviously just writes for myself and sticks it in a drawer and thinks, this is as good as I can get it. I'm just happy that it exists. Like I don't have to sell a lot, but I want my books to get published, and I want to get them out there, and I want that inner critic voice to dissipate over the years.
Okay.
And I would love it if like I felt like my publishing got off to a good start, and then the teaching took over. And I would like it to be more balanced. I would love it. Success would be if I can teach and write and have them be mutually supportive, emotionally, psychologically, financially, geographically. And that is not happening right now for me or most people that I know who are writers and teachers.
Because what are the challenges that most people are facing?
Money and not being agented, or I think social media is good once you have a product and you can get it out to the world, and it's good for getting support. But I also think that it affects me because it's like a popularity contest, and it's also like the most popular people on social media are not the best writers necessarily. Right. And then it puts out, I'm friends with all these people I went to school with, and they're all publishing articles in the Times in New York or whatever. Then I start to feel bad about myself. So I would really like to get, like, success to me is, I'll never be perfect, but, like, I would like to get more internally focused than externally focused. And I would like to not compare myself to others. But I think that in order for me to do that, I have to keep consistently having output and getting my voice published. Because
how are those things connected? Because the published that feels like an outer thing, but what you just said, defining success was an inner thing. So just can you connect those two for me a little bit?
Well, for me, also, like, this is where therapy, I think, helps. Because, like, I'm also aware that publishing and teaching makes me happy because it's authentic and that I'm being seen and heard. It's also very controlled in that I determine what you see and hear. And so it's, I'm not saying this is good or bad. This is just, like, I am a people pleaser, and I didn't get a lot growing up that I needed on any level. So even though I don't know the people that are gonna read the book or whatever, like, knowing that they're out there and they're connecting, even having a couple of stories published, and maybe like 24 people read the stories, but that floats my boat. Like, I'm still like on cloud nine that it exists in hard copy and print. And so it will make me feel like everything's worthwhile. And I think that one thing I'm good at is, like, I have strong opinions about teaching and reading and writing and stuff like that. But I also am really interested in working with the world as it is. And writing is a business. And so I think part of me that doesn't mind if I'm rejected, 58 times if I'm accepted twice. A lot of writers are afraid of that rejection or afraid of sending their work out. And like, I'm just afraid of not getting it done. Once it's done, I'll send it out and I'm open to fixing it. I'm open to, you're the agent, you're the book designer, it's the wrong title, you tell me what you think is going to work. Because I've already done all the work that I need to do to get to this point. So I don't know. I'm also like I'm single. I'm not dating anybody right now. I never wanted kids. So I think that maybe I have a lot of pressure on myself built into this book, but I also have a lot of time that I'm not spending on anybody else to put into this book and to think about it. Right. So the book is so personal to me, but I also want it to have a place in the larger world, in the public world. I think that will give me closure. And so success is having this really personal thing be accepted, however that means, out in the world, even if it's just a book sitting on a coffee table. That sounds very abstract, but...
No, I get it. Because then it's bigger than you.
Yeah.
Then it's part of the cultural fabric.
Yeah. And I want to connect with people. They're messy characters. And I want messy people to read the messy characters and not feel so alone and not feel so messy. Everybody's messy. It wasn't just me. Those are the books that I like to read. Yeah.
Can you make a few book recommendations?
Yes, I can. There, There by Tommy Orange is fabulous. He's a Native American author. The book is very kind of montage-like, and it's kind of urban and gritty, and there's gun violence in there, and it's a coming-of-age novel. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name exactly, but right above that, Tessa Moshfegh. So that one is My Year of Rest and Relaxation, and she writes about really fucked up female characters that are self-medicating and messy and are quote-unquote unlikable. And I love unlikable female characters. So those two are really good. Oh, and then at the top, I guess those are my most recent reads. The top is, it's called How to Write an Autobiographical Novel by Alexander Chee. So it's a collection of essays on his writing process, his learning process, teaching, being gay, being biracial. They're all beautifully written books.
At this point, now that you're not self-medicating
right.
in the same way, we talked about therapy. Are there any other kinds of self-care that you do, or things that you would recommend that other people do? Resources, even places that you go for inspiration, just to put some gas in your tank.
Yeah, well, I do yoga, and now I do it at home. And I started meditating. So after I do yoga, then I'll meditate for 10 minutes. Okay. So maybe twice a week. And I've been boxing. I'm terrible, but I'm a lot better than I used to be. It's been 3 years. I've been boxing every week with a trainer.
Cool.
And he's like family. He's like this annoying, lovable little brother. And it's physical and it's cardio, which I'm terrible at. And it gets a lot of anger out and you hit things. And I'm a little person, but I love it when I actually get muscles that I can see. And it helps with everything. It helps with the yoga. It helps with the posture. It helps with my anxiety sometimes I get about teaching, when I'm teaching. And for me too, animals are always a big part of my life. So my vacation at the end of the summer was, again, the Airbnb, but I went to this equine therapy.
Oh.
And just to stay there. But I was staying in a room that was in a horse rescue. And I knew that was part of it. And it was super cheap. And I just fell in love with the woman that owns it. And and her daughter and her partner, and this other woman was actually taking a whole like equine massage course while we were there, and she's German and spectacular. Like her background is in business, and it's like I would write during the day, go for a hike, eat vegetables off the vine, and then the chickens were being fed, and the donkey, I'd go out and like pet the donkey, and the donkey like bosses the horses around, and these horses are huge. They're ex-race horses, so they're not to be ridden like trail ridden. They have gaping wounds. They're being nursed back to health.
Yeah,
and they're so well cared for that I've been around horses a lot. I've never been around these huge horses, and they follow you around like golden retrievers. So I'm not a big outdoorsy person, but I'm a big animal person, obviously. And the dogs just, like there was nobody there when I first checked in, and the dogs just ran over to me and flopped over on their backs and like for belly rubs. So any interaction with animals, it's hard in the city because I love big dogs. I can't have a dog.
Yeah.
But anything that's not like circus or the zoo, like any kind of animal refuge, Woodstock has a big one, anything animal related.
And then where can people go to find some of your writing, or to find out more? Do you have a social media presence? Do you have a website?
No.
Can you, at the very least, tell us the names of your short stories and where we can Google them?
Well, they're not. They're in print. So
like
they're not,
legit only in print?
Yeah.
So I have to order like a back issue?
I can give them to you. I can give you a copy of each. I'll give you a copy of both of the magazines because I have extra copies.
I mean, I'd love that.
Yeah. No,
presuming that there's an audience out there listening, how could they do this? In the normal school, that's the one where I won the fiction prize, and that story is called Montage, and that's based on a recovering alcoholic and single mother who lives in the Chelsea Hotel and runs into someone from her past who is not good for her, that has video evidence of something she did. So that's Montage in normal school. And then the Missouri Review, what did we end up calling it for that? I think we just called it Haut, Isleauhaut, which is a small island off the coast of Maine where my aunt lives. And that's about the 9/11 widow who leaves Manhattan, moves to the island to stay with her aunt. There's 30 people who live on the island in the off season, and 60 people who live on the island in the summer. And she proceeds to start sleeping her way across the island. So she has 3 lovers, and one is serious about her, and she's just trying to get over losing her husband in the Twin Towers. So Montage and Haut, and it's so old fashioned. It's print magazines. I guess you have to buy a back issue or something. And I don't have there's not enough to put on a website yet or anything. Okay.
So someday I'm on Facebook. But
all right.
Yeah.
Just Facebook.
I don't do
Facebook?
Yeah, just Facebook.
Okay.
I don't do the Insta anything or the tweeting, and I have an addictive personality, obviously. So I just keep in with Facebook, and even I feel like I'm even on there too much. I go into my little masochistic, compare my insides to other people's outsides. Yeah, so I have to limit that too. That's it.
Well, yeah, and I don't think we'd be hard pressed to find many stories of like good things that came from spending a lot of time on Facebook.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I'd say you're probably doing better for limiting your time.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a real opportunity cost there.
And that's time away from. I mean, nothing takes the place of reading and writing. And it's like I just think all this platform and like online presence, and I just feel like that's kind of overhyped. But maybe it's just because I'm not there yet in my career, so I have no use for it yet.
Right.
But I do see that the way that my mind and a lot of minds are wired is that it's down the rabbit hole, and I just have to stay away from it a lot of the time to get everything done. And to not be stressed out, it stresses me out.
Right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alex. Pleasure.
Hey guys, just a couple quick things before you go. First off, thank you so much for listening. Stop Waiting Tables is a brand new show, so it means the world that you're here and that you've listened all the way to the end. So thank you. You can find out more about today's guest and check out a full list of all of the episodes that I've recorded on my website, www.alexmcurtis.com/podcast. Also, if you live in the New York area, feel free to pop by and say hello. I have a one-man show called Chalk, a silent comedy. That's chalk like you draw on a chalkboard, chalk. And that happens every month in the East Village at the Crane Theater. And if you're interested in coming to check that out, it's a really playful, imaginative show, and all the details about that are on my website as well. Again, I'm Alex Curtis, and this is Stop Waiting Tables. Happy listening, and until next time. Check, please.